Okay, session 4. This is my favorite night of Esther because there's a whole lot going on, and I'm going to be going fast because we're going to cover a lot of ground because there was no good place to stop. All right, if I left you hanging, you were going to hate me. So we're going to cover a lot tonight. So think fast, write fast, listen fast, but I hope you're going to love it. There's a lot in these few chapters of Esther. So last week we covered the first part of chapter 5 when Esther went to the king. And I'm going to go ahead and start back on verse 1 again, just because it's a good place to start. But Esther's going to the king, and this is going to be hard for several reasons. One is he has made a decree by his own authority. Remember, he's the king of most of the known world at the time. He's a big dude, okay? And she is fixing to go try to fight something that he put into place. So that's kind of shaky ground to begin with. She also knows that she has a very powerful enemy in Haman, but he doesn't really know he's her enemy yet. Now, I would assume a guy like him would be jealous of her because she has a place in the king's life, and he obviously likes to worm his way into the king's life. So he may see some enmity with her, but he has no idea. He doesn't know she's a Jew, and he's made this big decree that's going to kill all the Jews, and he's fixing to find out here in a little while how much of an enemy she is for him. But she does know that he's a terrible enemy for her. She's going to have to, at some point in all of this, reveal that she's a Jew. And while Jews were living successfully in Persia at the time, that doesn't mean they were always loved. Anti-Semitism was a big deal back then even. Always has been, always will be. And so she's going to have to reveal that, and she really doesn't know for sure how the king will react to that. She's been his wife for about 5 years. It seems so far that things have been okay, but she's not sure how he'll react to this. And lastly, the really most difficult part is she has to go before him uninvited, and that carried a potential death penalty. So we know this because it was going to be part of the law or part of the culture, but presumably we might know it because it's happened before, that someone walked into the throne room uninvited and the king wasn't in the mood. Or maybe because they were an enemy, but maybe just because he didn't want to see him. And he had guards on standby that if he didn't hold his scepter out for them to touch, which meant that they were welcomed, then it was off with their head, presumably right in front of him in the throne room. And so she has to walk into that environment not knowing what she's walking into. She's just going in on a hope and a prayer. So we'll start chapter 5, verse 1. On the third day of the fast, remember that she had asked Mordecai to have all the Jews fast for 3 days, and that she and her household will fast for 3 days as well. On the third day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes and entered the inner court of the palace just across from the king's hall. So it's important what she put on. Number one, because we're girls and we want to know these details. I want to know what color they were and all that stuff. Did they have any diamonds on them, or that black and white polka dotted fur that royal people wear around their necks or something? But it says royal robes, and that's important because she did not dress as a lover. She didn't dress as a friend or a companion. She dressed as a queen. And so when she walked in, there was an immediate reminder of her status, who she was. She was the queen of Persia. So the king's a big deal, and the queen probably didn't have really authority, but she did have status. And so it was a reminder to him and everybody else who she was. And it says the king was sitting on his royal throne facing the entrance, and when he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, and this is what tells the tale right here, it can all go either way, he welcomed her and held out the gold scepter to her. Whew. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. And I think if I'd been Esther at that point, I would have probably fallen down in a dead faint, because she has not lost her head, at least not yet. Verse 3, then the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half my kingdom." So this is certainly unexpected. She's just thankful to not have lost her head, and he is offering her half of his huge kingdom. Now, I've talked a lot about the kingdom being 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia, which is huge. You know, get out a map or get out the globe and look how big that is. But today I was doing some further study, and the way one guy talked about it was that it was 23 nations. And I don't really know if that's based on what the map would look like today, that kingdom, 127 provinces, which are the same as our states, would cover 23 nations in the known world today. But to me, that sounded even bigger. I don't know, that kind of got me as, he ruled 23 nations, basically. And that was the coverage of his territory. And he's offering to give her half of it. So her first hurdle's been crossed, and she's gotten to keep her head. It appears that he has good intentions toward her. She was worried because she was going uninvited, and because, as she told Mordecai, the king had not been to see her or called for her in 30 days. So she had reason to believe she had fallen out of favor with him. But obviously, he likes her. Now, I just wanted to ask the question, and we're not going to stay here, but it's really a good time. I guess any time's a good time for this question. But how many times do the things we worry about never, ever come to pass? Now, in this case, she had reason to be concerned. There was precedent for what could happen, terrible things, if she went uninvited to the king. And he does have sort of a record of some mental instability or impulsivity or something not good. And if he just was in a bad mood that day, she didn't know what she was walking into or what he would do about it. So she had reason for concern, but keep in mind that the huge, vast majority of the things that we worry about never do happen. So verse 4, and Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for the king." So, if it please the king. So I had somebody from this study kind of mention to me about if it please the king, and how concerned are we with pleasing our king. So she knew what to say. She had spent 5 years with this man. She had, presumably in the year she was being prepared to meet him, she had the ear and the favor of one of the eunuchs who kind of told her how to prepare, how to dress to go to the king, what to take with her, and she followed his advice. And so presumably he had sort of told her about the king's personality, about how she could best find favor with the king. And then she's had 5 years to know him and to study him before she has to do this. And she wants to please the king. It is necessary for her to please the king at this point. Her life and the life of her whole race depend on it. So if it please the king, and when we're talking about the Most High King, how much concern do we give to what pleases the king? So verse 5, the king turned to his attendants and said, now this is right here in the throne room. She's issued an invitation, and right then the king says, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet as Esther has requested." Wow, like drop everything, and you too, Haman, and let's go. Esther said so. It's unexpected. So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. Now, Esther did not walk into the throne room and make her request. That's also a little unexpected. I think about what I would have done. I would have run in there and said, "Before you cut my head off, let me tell you what I need." And then I'd have begged and pleaded and yelled and stomped my feet and screamed and hollered, and I don't know what I'd have done. Tried to make him laugh. I don't know. She didn't. She's very patient. She's very, I'm going to say calculating, although that can be taken as a negative word, and I don't mean it negatively. But she was patient. She took her time. She used the time. And we're going to see later how important this is, that she did not rush this. So first, remember the fast, that God is not mentioned and prayer is not mentioned, but the reason for fasting, besides some sort of health reason, would be for prayer. And it's thought that whoever wrote the book of Esther would not have mentioned God because they're living in a pagan culture that might have been counter to God. And so we can possibly assume that there was prayer accompanying the fasting, and that when she fasted, she sought God's favor with prayer. And then she's courting the king's favor. And when she has the favor of God and the king, she's going to make her request. But she's working on the king right now. Also, just for the record, note that she knows that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. She's prepared a banquet. So verse 6, and while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom. So for the second time, he has said, you can have whatever you want up to half my kingdom. That's a lot, y'all. Verse 7, Esther replied, this is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about. Now, I read in a book today, this was just sort of a funny little side note, where the man who wrote the book said, okay, men, think about your wives. And if you say to your wife what's wrong, she's probably going to say nothing. And so that first nothing was when Esther was in the throne room. And he said, tell me what you want. She said, nothing, just come to dinner. And he said, if you're a good husband, you know that nothing does not really mean nothing. And he said, in the scheme of marriage and between husbands and wives, it seems that this slight little deception, that nothing thing, is maybe okay because it worked here with Esther. I don't know. But he said, just like the king at the banquet repeated himself, what do you want, Esther? I'll give it to you. And she said, nothing, just come to dinner again tomorrow. And a good husband would know that nothing doesn't really mean nothing. So he says, okay, and he's going to wait his time, and he's going to ask her again. And that's exactly what happens. So, verse 9. The first banquet's over. They're invited to banquet number 2 tomorrow. Verse 9, Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh his wife and boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. Now that made me laugh, y'all. Do you think his wife doesn't know how many children he has? Okay. And we find out in chapter 9 that he had 10 sons. It doesn't say how many daughters he had, but I'm kind of laughing about that. I'm kind of thinking Zeresh should have been the one to boast about the 10 sons and however many daughters, since Haman didn't really put in a lot of work for that. Okay. But he's the one doing the boasting about his great wealth and his many children. He bragged about the honors the king had given him and how he had been promoted over all the other nobles and officials. Then Haman added, and that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us. And she's invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow. So he leaves the banquet happy. He becomes furious that Mordecai doesn't bow, but he goes on home and he brags to his wife and his friends, or his fan club, I saw it written, about all his accomplishments, his wealth, all those wonderful things about him. Wonderful. So, great riches, a multitude of children, power, authority, and the honor given to him by the queen who invited him to dine with her and the king in a private dinner. Now, he has no idea he's being totally set up, and it's going to turn out very tragically for him. He thinks he's being honored. Y'all know anybody like that? Okay, now you don't have to nod your heads, raise your hand, wave at me or anything, but you know anybody that you would like to see turn out like Haman after they think they're being so wonderful? No comment. Verse 13, then he added, so he's still talking to his wife and his friends. Then he added, after he's told them all of this good stuff, but this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate. He is a scumbag, y'all. Slimeball. That's not very Christian, but he is. So in his very next breath, after he's bragged all about himself and the honor given him by the queen, which is not really an honor, but he doesn't know it, he is talking about how unhappy he still is. 14, verse 14, so Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends suggested, set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall, and in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king. This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. So if you're reading like King James Version, it's going to say 50 cubits high, a pole 50 cubits high. And remember that version says set up a gallows that someone could be hung on. And we talked about this when it talked about the 2 eunuchs that had planned to assassinate Xerxes, and Mordecai heard about it, told Esther, who told the king, who had him executed on a gallows, that they were hung on a gallows, but that in that culture, what it really meant was a sharpened pole, and people were impaled on it, and then the pole was hung up, and that person was left there to wiggle around until they died. And it's really gross and horrific and brutal, and you try not to get in trouble like that, okay? So that's what kind of gallows that it's talking about if you're reading an older translation of the Bible. But what it means is a sharpened pole for impalement. 75 feet tall, that's 50 cubits. So just so you know, a cubit is about 18 inches. It's about the length of a man's elbow to fingertips. And so it's 1.5 feet. And my dad always taught me that a story on a building was 10 to 12 feet if you just wanted to quickly calculate how tall something was. And so McQuistion or Paris Regional North Campus is 5 stories. That would be 50 to 60 feet high. Or First National Bank downtown is 6 stories. That would be 60 or a little more feet high. Okay, this is 75 feet in the air. Okay, I don't know how tall that flagpole is at Toyota, but think about it. Think about a pole attached to the top of that flagpole with a dying guy wiggling around on top of it. That's what we're talking about. Ugh. So his fan club had a solution for his problem, and they said to him, if you'll do this thing, you can happily go off to dinner with the queen. And he said, what a great idea. Just wait. So chapter 6, we're at a really big turning point. That night, so the very same night after the first banquet that Haman and the king have with Esther, that night the king had trouble sleeping. Now, I read one commentator that said Esther fed the king so much wonderful, delicious food, and we don't know what kind of food, but the breasts of hummingbirds kept coming up. So evidently, hummingbirds were a delicacy, and the breast of a hummingbird would be a tiny little morsel, and that they would be served on toothpicks of ivory and ebony in some special sauce or several special sauces, and maybe that he dined on the breasts of hummingbirds or something like that. Sounds real dainty, not really manly, but whatever he liked. Maybe he was so full he couldn't sleep. He had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. Now, it's a history book. It says on this day, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And on this day, this happened, and this happened. So if something is going to put you to sleep, it would probably be a book like this. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate Xerxes. So if y'all remember back, that was at the end of chapter 2. That little story, just a few verses, is after Esther has been chosen as queen and crowned. And we don't know if this happened right after, but the time between Esther being chosen and now is about 5 years. So sometime probably closer to her coronation, up to 5 years ago, is when that actually happened. And it was written in the book, and then nothing else was done or said about it. So the king has had this book read to him so he can hopefully get sleepy. And he's now heard the story again. Now he's remembering. And in verse 3, he says, what reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? And his attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. Aha. So this is just a lesson that God can use the smallest thing, the sleeplessness of this man. Okay? And things start turning on this right here. So go back to what I said a minute ago. If Esther had gone into the throne room and she had said, this is what I want, this would have never come about. And if Esther had answered the king in the first banquet, what do you want, Esther? I'll give it to you up to half the kingdom. And she had said, well, this is what I want, this would not have happened. So her being patient, and in our day and time, as New Testament believers, we would call this being led by the Holy Spirit, which we need to allow ourselves to do. She had waited past the throne room, past the first banquet, and all this is happening in between. And there's more to come. Just wait. So nothing has been done for Mordecai. This is where we see God's providence at work. So if you remember, Haman had said to the king when he got him to sign the decree that all the Jews could be killed. Remember, he never said who the group of people were that were not obeying the king's laws. And he had said, like, these people are not profitable to you. You would do good to be rid of them. So here's an example right here of a Jew that's profitable to the king. He had saved the king's life by reporting what he had heard about the assassination attempt. So Haman's story, Haman's motives are starting to fall apart. Now, about rewarding Mordecai, in that culture, if someone did a good thing, they were nicely rewarded. And Mordecai had just been forgotten. It wasn't like anything malicious, it doesn't seem, on the king's part. He had just forgotten to reward Mordecai. But it was right for him to reward Mordecai. It also seems that when Mordecai didn't get rewarded, he had not gone to the king and said, hey, like, aren't you supposed to give me some reward? He had not sent a message. He had not done anything. He had not complained that we know about to anybody, saying, you know, the king should have rewarded me and he didn't, and I saved his life. So we see no bitterness or anger on his part that we know about. Also, Mordecai is going to receive such a great reward, and it would be easy to think right now with Haman in power and what Haman has done that it's the evil people receiving great reward. So you don't have to go there. I'm going to read a few verses out of Psalm 37 because, like I've told you before, I like to let the Bible back up the Bible. And Psalm 37 is one to pull out whenever you think that the bad people are winning, okay? If your enemy seems to be on top, go to Psalm 37. And these are a few of the verses. Verse 1, don't worry about the wicked or envy those who do wrong. For like grass, they soon fade away, and like spring flowers, they soon wither. Trust in the Lord and do good, then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires. I'm going to stop there a second and say I used to think that sounded great. The Lord will give me my heart's desires if I delight in him. Oh, it's so simple. I delight in him. He's delightful. Where are my heart's desires? And I had to learn that what that meant was that the Lord will give me the desires of my heart that line up with the desires of his heart. Okay? That complicates things a little for me. Commit everything you do to the Lord, trust in him, and he will help you. He will make your innocence radiate like the dawn, and the justice of your cause will shine like the noonday sun. Be still in the presence of the Lord. Wait patiently for him to act. Don't worry about evil people who prosper or fret about their wicked schemes. Just don't worry about those people, right? It's so easy. I love Julie, just smiles at me at all the right times. Thank you, Julie. Stop being angry. Turn from your rage. Don't lose your temper. It only leads to harm. 4, verse 9. This is all the reasons for all of that. For the wicked will be destroyed, but those who trust in the Lord will possess the land. Soon the wicked will disappear. Though you look for them, they'll be gone. The wicked plot against the godly. They snarl at them in defiance, but the Lord just laughs, for he sees their day of judgment coming. The wicked draw their swords and string their bows to kill the poor and the oppressed, to slaughter those who do right. Isn't that exactly what's happening with this decree against the Jews? But their swords will stab their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. Put your hope in the Lord. Travel steadily along his path. He will honor you by giving you the land, and you will see the wicked destroyed. The Lord rescues the godly. He is their fortress in times of trouble. The Lord helps them, rescuing them from the wicked. He saves them, and they find shelter in him. That is more important than ever in these times. So it would be easy to think, we've said before, that a little virus is our enemy. No, it's a tool of an enemy. We have an enemy, but it's not flesh and blood. It's not anything living. Well, I guess he's living, but he's not of life. Don't forget who the real enemy is. So verse 4. Okay, so the king has gotten his attendant to read this book. He's found the story about Mordecai reporting the assassination plot. He says, what have we done to reward Mordecai? And the attendant says, nothing. And the king hears maybe some noise outside his door and says, who is that in the outer court? As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. So this is how he's going to start the king's day. Your Majesty, may I have a man impaled on a pole this morning? And then maybe we can have breakfast. So the attendants replied to the king, Haman is out in the court. This is where it's going to get real funny, y'all. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and before he could say anything about his request, the king said, Haman, my friend, my buddy, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Okay, now y'all, this is the very same night. Haman is plotting to kill Mordecai that day, and the king is preparing to reward Mordecai that day. Y'all see the contradiction going on, and neither one of them knows it yet. That is the providence of God. So here we go with Haman and his humble nature. Haman thought to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? So he replied, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with a royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. So Haman has just told the king what he would like the king to do for him because he thinks he deserves this. Now, just to go back through what he wants. He wants the honoree to be dressed in the king's own royal robes. He wants the honoree placed on a horse that the king himself has ridden. He wants to put a royal emblem on the horse's head so that everyone will know it is the king's own horse, not just any old horse. He wants the robes and the horse given to one of the king's most noble officials. Now, understand that Haman, second in the kingdom only to the king, knows that this noble official will be lesser than him, but oh well, what can you do about that? He wants this most noble official to dress the honoree in the king's robes and place him on the king's horse. He wants the most noble official to walk through the city square while leading the king's horse on which the honoree is riding. And he wants this most noble official to shout as they go, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Sounds like it's going to be a great day for Haman, according to Haman. And this is what happens. Verse 10, excellent, the king said to Haman. Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested. And y'all, I think that's maybe the funniest little section of scripture that there is. Okay? Because Haman is so pompous and so full of pride that he just knows that when the king asked his advice on how to honor someone, he just knew it was him. No question, never thought anything different. Said exactly what he wanted. The king thought it was a great idea for Mordecai the Jew. And his most noble official was Haman. Shouldn't that be an honor? I bet Haman didn't take it that way. And the king said, do what you just said. Perfect idea. Don't leave out a thing you said. Verse 11, so Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai and placed them on the king's own horse, placed him on the king's own horse. and led him through the city square, shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Only I think it probably sounded like, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Because I think this was the most humiliating moment of his whole life. Now, it's going to get worse, but up till now, I think this has got to be the crash of all crashes. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before a fall." And Haman is falling fast, but he doesn't know it yet. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. Now, y'all have heard me say before, there's a few times in scripture where I think if they'd let a woman write part of this, she'd included some details that the rest of us would like to hear. So all we got of that most hilarious story is Haman took the robes, put them on Mordecai, got him on the horse, led him through the square, said this, end of story. Mordecai returns to the gate. Haman goes home dejected. I want more, okay? I think that I wished I was a fly on the wall in the king's bedchamber when he told Haman, "Oh, go do that for Mordecai the Jew." I want to see the look on his face. I can't imagine how incredulous he must have been that, oh my gosh, the king totally misread what I was saying, but he couldn't really speak up and say anything. It's the king, okay? And, oh wait, the king must have not understood me. How could I backtrack? Could I say, oh, well, maybe that's too much to do for someone. How about we just like give him a gift card to somewhere instead? You know, no, there was no going back. He was so full of himself that he put all that out there and it got totally turned around on him. So I would have also liked to see Mordecai's face when Haman showed up, because there have been repeated encounters at the gate where Haman rode by and Mordecai refused to bow. And I don't think Mordecai probably stood there with his head down. I think there was probably full eye contact every time, so that he was looking to Haman looking disrespectful, but certainly looking solid and firm in his conviction that he was not going to bow. And so when Haman showed up, Mordecai had to know Haman hated him beyond anything else. He's going to kill a whole race of people because of what Mordecai has done. Not that it's Mordecai's fault, but it's the catalyst for what was going to happen. And I'd love to know what he was thinking right about that time. And then I think I would have been paranoid as heck that this man's going to get me and put me on a horse, and what's he fixing to do with me? Like, I don't think he's fixing to do what I'm told he's fixing to do that the king told him to do. I think this is some plot that he's fixing to do me in, okay? Now, Mordecai doesn't know yet that Haman had made plans to have him executed today, okay? Not that we know of. So I'd have just liked to have been on the inside of a couple of heads on that one and seen how that all played out. So verse 13, Haman has gone home dejected and completely humiliated. And it says, when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what happened, do y'all remember when he went home and told them, I've been to the banquet with the queen, but it's nothing as long as Mordecai won't bow down. And they said like, hey, here's this thing you ought to do. And he said, that's a great idea. And he ordered it done. All right, now he's going home to these same people again. When he told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. So his greatest fans have now become his greatest detractors. He is alone in this hatred thing, okay? So, verse 14, there's no more talking about it. While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So, this is all happening in a single day, y'all. There was a banquet yesterday. The king couldn't sleep. Haman has had to lead Mordecai through the streets, and now he's going to the second banquet. We don't really know what time of day the banquet was. It seems that first one maybe was during the day. This one might have been at night, but not really sure. Remember, if Esther had said in the throne room or at the first banquet what she wanted when the king asked her, he's asked her twice now, none of this would have played out. Now, also understand at this point neither Esther or Mordecai know that the tide is turning. They don't have the backstory. They don't know what's going on. Esther doesn't probably even know that the king has rewarded Mordecai that day and had Haman lead him through the streets on the horse. Mordecai may not know that Haman had dined with Esther the day before and was on his way to dine with her again. So there's a whole lot unknown, which also makes it very clear that it is God who is in the background working all this out. So chapter 7, we covered 2 chapters already, and we got one more we're going to do tonight. So like I told you, we're moving ahead fast, but there's so much in here. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. On this second occasion, while they were drinking wine, she knows how to get to him with the wine. The king again said to Esther, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." This is the 3rd time, y'all, he's offered her half the kingdom. So he must like her, okay? And he really does want to know what she wants. So again, like this one commentator said, it's like she has now said nothing, but she's fixing to tell him what it really is if she feels that the time is right. Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared." Now, I bet that's not what the king was expecting to hear. He's going to go, "What are you talking about? For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us." So I don't know if you remember in the decree, it didn't just say we're going to kill them. Kill, slaughter, annihilate. I think one translation says destroy. There's 3 words used about what Haman wants done to the Jews. It's not just like, oh, let's kill them. It's like wipe them utterly out. They're horrible. So my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. Now, listen to this line. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Well, no, it wouldn't. But since that is not what happened, that's a pretty good line to use. Like, king, I wouldn't have bothered you with anything except something this humongously serious. That's a good line. But notice that she's very humble toward him again. She's gone at great risk into his presence uninvited. She has twice prepared a banquet of all his favorite foods, I'm sure, in the most beautiful setting, I'm sure. She's now speaking to him super respectfully. She needs his favor. And it's going to be a way of conveying to him, gosh, if she's willing to go through all that to ask me for what she needs, this must be huge to her. So verse 5, "Who would do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. "Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?" So when she says, "Me and my people are going to be killed," he's thinking like someone is going to, physically, like he goes there first. That's my wife. Who is going to dare lay hands on you in any way? That's going to be important in a minute. And Esther replied, okay, here's a lot of bravery right here, y'all. Here's her, the king, and the king's best friend, who's a wicked, powerful man. And she knows it, but the king does not. Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy." Well, there you have it. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. So he right then knew it's over. Right then. He turns pale with fright. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out to the palace garden. Like, okay. My first thought was like chicken, run off. My second thought was, what good coping mechanisms that you would walk away to catch your breath and get your cool about you before you come decide something, especially with your history of impulsivity when you're angry. I don't know. I don't know what he was doing, but I think the ultimate thought to have was that he didn't question Esther about it. He believed her immediately. Now, what is that about? So here's his best friend who apparently has been closer to him than Esther. There's no reason for us to believe that, you know, he talked politics with Esther, that she was an advisor of his, you know, in their pillow talk or anything else. But Haman and he would sit down and drink and talk about all this. And when Haman said, I want to do away with these people they're not good for your kingdom, O king. And the king goes, yeah, do whatever you want. You know, didn't even ask who they were. Like, Haman clearly has had his ear. And so it's kind of surprising how he responds, but he didn't question her. It seems that he believed her immediately. The king jumped to his feet in a rage, went out into the palace garden. So the script has flipped on a dime. She's gotten past this next hurdle with her request. And then this announcement, who has threatened her and her people. And she's gotten the king feeling fine with food and wine and a beautiful setting, probably some pleasant conversation. He is now enraged, so enraged he has to leave the room. Haman, who was so proud to be included in Esther's invitation 2 whole times now, is now exposed for who he really is. Nothing at this point is as it was 30 seconds ago. Y'all think about that. 30 seconds ago, Esther is like, okay, here we go. The king is relaxed, probably happy, like, this is a great evening. And Haman thinks he is riding on top of the world except for this Jew who will not bow down. But we're fixing to fix that in a little while with a sharpened pole. Okay? And 30 seconds probably later, however long it took her to say, verse 3 and 4, everything's different in their worlds. And so it says, Haman, so the king's gone to the garden in a rage. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. 30 seconds ago, he did not think this, but now he knows. There's no question. He's not thinking, oh, maybe it's going to be okay. Y'all go back to when I read out of 1 Samuel chapter 15, when it said, you know, that Saul had spared the life of King Agag. Remember that Haman is an Agagite. He's a descendant of King Agag. And if Saul had done what he was supposed to do and killed that king, we wouldn't have Haman to deal with. But Saul didn't, and he spared the life of the king. And Samuel the prophet went to him and confronted him about it. And Samuel said, bring the king to me, Agag. And they bring Agag in front of Saul and Samuel. And Agag thinks, oh, maybe my life's going to be spared. And what happened to him was, it says Samuel hacked him to death before the Lord. It didn't just like cut his throat in a nice, humane way. Hacked him to pieces before the Lord. So this is kind of a little bit reminiscent of that. Haman thought he could beg the queen and have his life spared because he knew what the king was about to do, unless he could get her to change the king's mind. And so it says, now this is funny right here, verse 8, in despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king is returning from the palace garden. So what this looks like, I don't know if he tripped because he was upset, he tripped because he was drunk, he threw himself on her to beg for mercy. But the king walks back in, and what it looks like is that Haman is assaulting the queen. That's a really, really, really bad idea. I'm missing a page, y'all. Give me just a second. I got to go to scripture and look this up. That's what I get for not counting my pages. The king exclaimed, would you actually violate the queen while I am in the palace? Like, you stupid idiot. If you weren't already a stupid idiot, you're a stupid idiot now. And as soon as the statement left the king's mouth, Haman's face was covered. Now, that was a thing in that culture where if you were condemned to die, they put a hood over your head and your face. And so it says, when the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. So right then, it's over. There's nothing else to do. Now, this is kind of funny here too. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, steps forward and says, Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Now, number one, he's a eunuch. He's a slave. Slaves don't speak. Slaves are not supposed to have an opinion about anything, much less to voice it, okay? But how bad a reputation do you think Haman must have had in the palace for a slave at this private, exclusive banquet between the king and the queen and this guy? How much must this guy be disliked for this slave to step forward and say, oh, by the way, king, I got an easy way for you to execute him. It would actually be pretty funny if you executed him on the gallows he built in his own yard, 75 feet in the air where everybody can see. And oh, by the way, he intended it for Mordecai the Jew, who you just rewarded today. Now, remember, they still don't know that Esther and Mordecai are related yet. Okay? So how bad must Haman's reputation be for Harbona to have stepped forward and said that? But the king says, well, then impale Haman on it. Great idea, Harbona. Thanks. We didn't have to go build a gallows for this scumbag. There's one already set up. And better than that, it's in his own front yard where his wife and all his friends can see. Now, I read in a commentary that the palace was kind of up on a hill, and wherever Haman's yard would have been, the 75-foot pole would have meant that Haman could have been at the palace and just, sat on the balcony with the king, drinking, looking at Mordecai impaled on this pole 75 feet in the air in his yard, so that it would have been for his viewing pleasure. It would also have been so everybody else could see and know that Haman was that powerful. But it was also for his own viewing pleasure that he could watch Mordecai die on this pole. So the king orders, then impale Haman on it. And so they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. And the king's anger subsided. That's a lot, y'all. That was 24 hours. So 24 hours ago, the queen wakes up one day and decides today's the day to go to the king. She fixes dinner. She goes at risk of her own life, knowing that just as easily as he might welcome her, he could just as easily not welcome her. And he wouldn't have had to say kill her. They'd have just done it because he didn't welcome her. So it's a very touchy situation. She walks in, he welcomes her. So surprise number one. Then he offers her half the kingdom. Surprise number two. Then she says, oh, nothing, just come to a banquet. Surprise number three. Okay? Haman goes to back up. The king says, go get Haman right now. We're going. Everybody drop everything. We're going to the queen's banquet because she said so. Surprise number whatever that was. So they go. Afterwards, Haman's happy. No surprise. But when he sees Mordecai, he's miserable again. Not really a surprise. Then his people, his wife and his friends say, oh, don't put up with that mess. Set that sharpened pole up in our own yard. And so he does it. That night, the king can't sleep. Pulls out the book. Reads about what Mordecai did for him a few years ago. Says, hey, we need to reward him. Get Haman in here. He'll know what to do. Says to Haman, without a lot of detail, what should we do for a man that I wish to honor? No surprise that Haman says, I know that he's talking about me. This is what I would like. Lists all these things he would like to do. The king says, great idea. Go do it for Mordecai the Jew. And don't leave. Big surprise to Haman. Big surprise to Mordecai. Haman rejected and humiliated. No surprise. Then he's called to the next banquet. Esther sets up a lovely banquet, no surprise. But then the king says, what do you want? And she tells him immediately what it is. The whole problem. And it's huge. We've been sold to be killed, annihilated, and destroyed, me and my people. The king is surprised. Who would do this? Not realizing that actually he's the one who would do this. He's the one who's
Olive Garden in Paris.
Somebody needs to mute their microphone because we're hearing some feedback. maybe April.
Oh.
So anyway, we know that the king is shocked by her news, but he doesn't really know what it means. He doesn't probably remember signing that decree, and he wasn't told who it was about. But here she is reporting it to him. She says our enemy and adversary is this wicked Haman right here. Haman is now surprised, like, ugh. The king is surprised and enraged, goes to the courtyard. Haman throws himself on Esther to beg and plead for mercy. I'm sure that surprised Esther. The king walks back and is surprised to find Haman laying on Esther, looking like he's attacking her. He comments on it. The guards or the attendants, whoever they were, knew exactly what the king intended by his comment and covered Haman's face. Haman is now surprised. Harbona says, I got something I want to tell you about. There's this gallows shut up in Haman's own yard who he wanted to use on Mordecai the Jew. I'm sure that surprised the king and Esther because the king had only that day rewarded Mordecai the Jew. And Haman was hauled off to his doom. 24 hours, y'all. So the handout this week it's green at the top. And it talks about the word watershed. So a watershed in geography terms is a place where it's a high point. So like when you talk about the continental divide, when you're looking at the high point on this side of the continental divide, the water runs this way, and on this side, the water runs this way. So on one side, it runs toward the Atlantic, on one side toward the Pacific. That's a watershed. But the definition, the second definition of it that we're interested in tonight is that it's an event or a period marking a turning point in a course of action or a state of affairs. So this 24-hour period was a watershed moment. It's a watershed in the kingdom of Persia. It's a watershed for the whole Jewish race. It is certainly a watershed for Haman, for the king, for Esther, and for Mordecai. And we're going to see just how much next week, what all that exactly means. But a watershed moment is the kind of moment that you mark your life by, where you say, my life before this happened, my life after this happened. So if there was a death, for example, before so-and-so died this, after so-and-so died this, maybe you don't say in 2004 or 2007, you say, before this happened, after this happened. And this right here in the book of Esther is a definite watershed moment. Well, God specializes in showing up in watershed moments. So in several of the things I read about Esther, they call them divine reversals. It was going this way, God intervened, and now it is going this way. So this is on the handout. These are some of the divine reversals. A peasant girl becomes a queen. Okay, not expected. She was meant to always be this Jewish peasant girl. And by peasant, she might not have been a poor girl, but she wasn't royalty. Okay, an enemy plot becomes God's opportunity to do something. The underdog, Mordecai, is delivered from death, Mordecai and the whole Jewish nation. And the top dog gets delivered to death. Okay, and right before this, it was the other way. Totally reversed. Now, in the big scheme of things, divine reversal means what once was lost is found, and those who were blind now see. If you're lost, get found. If you're blind, you can see. And again, I just extend the invitation that you can talk to me or lots of members of this group who would be happy to tell you how to make that happen. So the questions for this week are a little deep. Think about watershed moments that you measure your life by, and name a couple that have been significant for you in a painful way. And then think about a wow moment where God changed it. He flipped the script. And you were able to go, whoa, because right before that it was hopeless, and then it wasn't. And the last question says, think about watershed moments that you felt like God didn't come through. And evaluate whether you're still hurt or angry about them, because it's hard not to be. This is my personal belief. I think I'm right. I don't think God's worried about our being hurt or angry. There would be people that would tell you that you can't be hurt, angry, you can't ask questions, and I don't believe that. I believe he's a loving father who says, crawl up in my lap and let's talk about it. So the last question kind of challenges us to take that disappointment to the throne room and talk about it with the king. And I believe that he holds his scepter out and lets you touch the end of it. And then he says, crawl up in here in my lap and let's talk about it. So there's an opportunity to kind of go deep with God on this one. What are those things, those watershed moments, those before and after experiences you've had in your life? And in most lives, there's many watershed moments. This is your watershed moment until the next thing happens that sort of eclipses that one. Okay. So the handout is green. I'm going to post something to answer online. It's going to be #watershed. I want to say again, please go back to #purpose and the #coronamotions and #providence. And if you haven't posted there, please do. And if you haven't yet seen the post that I made today, I observed this week somebody really respond to someone else's post of their emotions and connect with them and show empathy. And that is what we all need. And that's been hard to accomplish doing this huge group like this, where we don't have the opportunity to interact online, and we're certainly not able to be in the same room together like we normally would. But it's a way for us to do that. And I feel very, very, very led that that's what we're supposed to do. So I kind of jokingly in the thing said, like, if you want to keep your head, be sure and go do that, because the Queen's getting kind of salty here. But I think you'll be blessed. And I've seen a couple more comments today. Please go do those. It is such a blessing to read what you write. And that's not only for me. Everybody would be blessed to read what everybody else writes about these things. So this week's will be #watershed, and please don't neglect to do that. So next week, we're going to see what happens in the aftermath of this. This is going to be the other side of the watershed that has just happened. What happens after that? And there is stuff in there that is very significant, even still today, for the Jewish nation, particularly the way they celebrate what happened after this. And they still celebrate it yearly to this day. And we'll talk about the Feast of Purim next week. Let me pray for us, and then we'll be done. Father God, I just thank you so much for this opportunity again, Lord, 4 weeks that you've allowed us to meet together and share your word. And Father, I just personally thank you for all the things, the new things you're showing me each time I study, how you just give me new and fresh insight. Lord, I thank you that your word never gets boring. Lord, that it's a living document and that it's constantly applicable to our lives in ways that we didn't know the last time we read the very same thing. Father, I just thank you for your care and protection of us, Lord. I thank you that you are a shelter in a time of big storm, Lord, such as we've never seen before. Father, I just pray you continue to lead us and guide us during this time, that you would help us to all know what to do, that you would help us to have wisdom, that you would give our leaders vast wisdom, Lord, that you would cause them to look to you for that wisdom. Father, that you would help us to listen and not let our personal opinions get in the way. Father, that you would give us calm and rest and just the knowledge that you have everything worked out at the end all the way from the beginning. Lord, just take care of each lady that's in this study, Lord, and her household. Lord, would you just bless each one of them this week? We love you so much. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night, ladies.